Hi, good morning. It is Wednesday, so that means it's time for another Business Analysis Live. My name is Susan Moore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at IIBA.
And I'm Scott Bennett. I'm the Manager of Business Analysis here at the International Institute of Business Analysis. And as you can tell, we're live, a little bit of a slip up there. Today we have a guest with us, Angelo Calavella. He's got a wonderful YouTube channel. We'll drop a link into the chat. And today we're going to be talking about UX design for business analysis. So welcome, Angelo.
I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. We are live on LinkedIn Live. So if you have questions, that's the reason we do these. Drop your question in. And these are also recorded. So if you're watching them after the fact, Susan, tell people how they can reach out and ask us a question.
You can ask us questions at live@iiba.org, and we'll get that and answer it in an upcoming session. Also, we've got a podcast, and you can find us on most of the podcast platforms: Google, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. You can leave us a voice message there, and we'll answer you here. So lots of ways, if you've got questions about business analysis, lots of ways for you to get in touch with us.
That's right. And Angelo, I stumbled across you, found you on YouTube as a YouTuber talking about business analysis. You've got some wonderful videos out there for those that are new to the business analysis space. Tell us a little bit about your channel.
When I started the channel, I felt that there was a little bit of a gap in, what we're telling people, from a BA profession, like even the IIBA and the way we're kind of speaking to people who may not really understand the profession. Either they're still in school, they're trying to change jobs. So a lot of what I cover on my channel is really ways to understand the different concepts of business analysis, so you understand what the role actually is, the types of things that we actually do, in a way that kind of leaves out that BA jargon that we like to use and puts it in more, we'll say, layman's terms, so anybody can really grasp like what it is that they should be accomplishing. And it's really for somebody who's in school, maybe somebody who got thrust into the position and didn't really understand what it was that they're supposed to be accomplishing, people who are in a totally different position or industry or whatever, and are thinking about making the transition in. So it's really for people to really get to understand the role, what we do, and how we provide value.
That's great. I've seen some of the comments in your videos and the audience is really appreciating it. So well done on that front. So
Thank you.
your background is UX design. So tell us a little bit about UX design and what business analysis professionals should be aware of.
Sure. So I would say that they're very tightly related in the same way that a business analyst might be tightly related to a project manager, right? A lot of organizations are kind of switching to an agile kind of mindset in how they develop, which means you're not always strictly doing one thing or one set of activities or roles.
Right.
So relative to user experience design, at a high level, what user experience design is essentially how people feel using your application, both in just the emotions of looking at it, but also in using it. Is it efficient? Do they like using it? Is it actually making their lives easier? Are they happy to come in and do whatever it is that they need to do in your application? And are they able to accomplish the things that they want to accomplish? So it kind of is an overall and encompassing bubble of all of those things. And as you can imagine, as a business analyst who's writing requirements for said applications, you have an influence. You're very tightly related to the user experience design. And depending on whether, looks like the lights off went in here, whether you have a user experience designer on your team or not, you may have to kind of step up and understand some of those theories or concepts to make sure you're delivering something good for your end user. So it's something that if you're interested in it as a business analyst, it's you could take up some of those responsibilities on the team, or at least be thinking about it so you know that the rest of the team is addressing it.
Angelo, I often say that business analysis is really a relationship business, and I think that user experience even more, you really do have to understand humans. You've got to talk to humans, and you really have to uncover what are their motivations, how do they feel, what are some of the techniques that you use, whether it comes from the business analysis body of knowledge or if it is specific to UX. What are some of the techniques that you use in order to talk human with them?
Yeah, and as you said, user experience design is 100% about the user. I think a lot of people in their mind, when they hear design and think about user experience, they're thinking about like artistic stuff, like the beautiful things and like cool
Okay.
interfaces and things like that. But the reality is, in order to create a good user experience, you have to talk to the user. You have to work with the user. How you work with that user depends on kind of what level you're at or what level or what step you're at in the kind of the process of building your application. So if you're early in the application, or really at any point, but most importantly, early, to make sure you're doing the right things, like we'll say in the requirements gathering phase, part of the activities you might do is interview end users to kind of learn more about them. And when you're learning more about an end user, it's not just the way you might do it as a business analyst, where you say, okay, I'm building this application that has this function. What functions do you want it to have, right? Those are the requirements. Those are the functional needs. When you're approaching it as a user experience designer, you're not just asking about what do you do in my application. You're asking them, what do they do as a whole? What is your job? What is your profession? What are your pain points in your career, in your role? And how can I make my application work in a way that fits into that environment, that life that you live outside of my application? One quote, and I don't remember where it came from, and if I do, I'll put it in a comment or something on the podcast or whatever, is that whatever application you're building, your user uses that application the least, period, right? If you use 100 applications, you're using each one 10%, right? So that's where you fit in their world. So you have to understand their whole world to try to match your application to better fit all the things that are already taking up likely more of their time.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because I know sometimes we get ourselves wrapped up in this project, and this project might be 80, 90, 100% of our time, but I think that's a great way to think about it. For these particular users, what they're doing is a small part of their day, but if it's not done well, it can be a really crummy part of their day. So you
Exactly.
really have to understand human emotion. Sometimes in the business analysis world, we say that when we do interviews, it's sometimes a little bit of therapy. Do you ever find yourself having a little bit of a therapy session with end users that you're talking with?
Absolutely. In fact, most of the time it's kind of a therapy session. And in fact, when I've talked to other user experience designers who are user experience designers by profession, and user experience designers come from all different backgrounds. I came from kind of the more technical BA background, but you find a lot of user experience designers who come from like a psychology background. And they're the ones who tend to, like, if you work for just a purely UX shop, they tend to be the user researchers who do go out and do those interviews and have those conversations. For me, because I'm already interviewing people for requirements, I just dig a little deeper than a BA might, to ask more questions about things beyond just the scope of the project. So it's really digging deeper, really getting to know people, really getting to understand, the type of person who chooses to be an accountant, for example. Like, what kind of person are they? Like, how do they think through their problems? And how do I make sure that my application actually addresses the way they think through their processes and problems, versus how I, who's a BA by profession, chose to be a BA pretty early on in my school career, right? That I'm different from them, right? And I can't do things the way I would do them. I should do things the way they would do them. And in order to do that or understand that, I have to talk to them and get to know them, right? So it's kind of, I find it kind of fun.
So I'm hearing empathy is at the top of the essential skills for a UI UX professional in this space.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How can BAs get started learning about UX UI design?
There's lots of different ways. I'll first talk about the way I got into learning user experience design. So I was on projects where we had user experience designers be a part of the team. So I was not the user experience designer. And I kind of saw the types of activities that they're doing. And user experience design, when you think about the full scope of it, from when you're first planning a project, so you're just thinking about the strategy of how you want to tackle something, to all the way down to the nitty gritty of final design, getting it out there, testing it. There's different activities you could do at every step. So what I chose to do was just pick one step that was right there in the middle. It was very similar to the types of work I was already doing as a business analyst, and I kind of dug in, and that was information architecture. And that's really understanding the taxonomy, terminology, navigation structures that a user might need to essentially get to what they want to do or accomplish what they want to accomplish. And so I just dug into one very specific area and said, I'm going to be good at this. And then once I am, I'll start branching out and see what I like. Because at the time, I didn't have a great understanding of what the total definition of user experience design was. I felt out of my depth as a graphic designer, which is where a lot of people think it is. So I was like, let me go this more structural route. And I picked that. And then from there, it kind of just blossomed out. And I started getting more opportunities at work to do user experience design. And that kind of led to me saying, okay, well, if I'm going to be doing more of it, I should get something a little bit more formal. I started with small trainings, things like you might find on like LinkedIn Learning. Actually, there's lots of good training there. I would say that you don't have to have a specific degree or certification to get started. It's more about knowledge and understanding that the value that you bring. So starting there is a great start. If you have the opportunity, I did get my master's degree in user experience design eventually, but that's not when I started doing user experience design work. That was just something that I wanted to kind of make sure I felt solid in my understanding. But really, you could pick any aspect of the user experience design, and you don't have to do it from end to end. And you could provide value on any product or project just by learning that one portion of it. And then as you feel comfortable, you could branch out, or you could just go all in and find a certification, find a degree program or whatever it is, and get the full education and jump in that way. So you can kind of start from like a grassroots or like go all in and still be quite successful.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's great advice, Angelo. It's I can really see your YouTube videos coming through and how you explain things. So that's great.
So this next question that we've got, actually, it touches on something that we were talking about before we got started with the broadcast. UX UI, is it functional or a non-functional requirement?
Oh, great. Both, actually. So non-functional in that user experience includes like usability. So usability is a common non-functional requirement. But in the process of um, building a functionality, a feature, especially something that somebody is interacting with, when you're defining that information architecture or interaction design, you're probably going to create something from a BA perspective that's going to look very similar to a use case, which is how a user is interacting with the system. In user experience design, they sometimes call it task analysis, but if you look at a task analysis diagram, it's going to look very similar to what we create in a use case. And in there, you're designing the functionality. So depending on how you're approaching it, it could be both. I also think, though, in a lot of cases, non-functional requirements, like when we say them like that, it feels like there's something separate from the requirements. But in truth, non-functional requirements are like how the requirement, the function should work, which is a little bit separate from what it does, but it's still part of the function. So it's not like a separate activity or something like that.
And really, because you are dealing in a certain way with human emotions, and you're building for a particular set of human emotions, I think that would qualify as non-functional because you're wanting to build that into the function of the system. So yeah, so it's both. So next question, are there applications that can be used or recommended for BAs to get work done? And so I think this might be a little bit of a tool question. I know we've had another tool question. So in a day in the life of Angelo, tell me about the kinds of tools that you might be using and how you might be using those in your work.
Sure. Yeah, so the tools question is always a tough one because one, there's hundreds and thousands of tools out there that all do very
That's
similar
right.
things. And ultimately, the best tool is going to be dependent on how you're working as a team, right? I work for a very large corporation where tools are kind of dictated, right? We have Teams and O360 and all those types of things. So naturally, I'm going to try to use some of those things. Day to day for me, from the UX perspective, I use Figma quite a bit. It's a free tool that anybody can download and use right away. It started out as a primarily wireframing and prototyping tool, but they've included some other like visual diagramming type tools. So if you wanted to create a concept map or a process flow, you could do those things in Figma. However, it's the tool at its heart for design and collaboration. Outside of that, I use Confluence, which is kind of an add-on to Jira. At a high level, the best way to explain it is similar to a wiki. It's a great way to document information. It has, you can connect it to some diagramming software. At our enterprise, we're connected to Glyphy, which is very similar to Visio or Draw.io, which is another free one that you can connect to Google. So I usually create diagrams in Glyphy, add them to a Confluence page, and kind of try to document there. As a manager, I'm doing a lot less of like the nitty gritty, like requirements documentation, which is primarily done in Jira, which again, it's an enterprise level tool. That's kind of, we're told to use that one. It's not like I chose that one. But ultimately, Jira is just a word processing tool, right? So a way to put a snippet of text in a location with a few attributes. And as we were talking about a little bit before the call, you could do the same things in like a SharePoint site. You just configure a list with the same kind of fields, and you could document the exact same things and accomplish all the same things. And so really it's less about the tool and less about knowing what you should be putting in that tool, because you could use 100 different things to do the exact same thing. But if you don't know what the thing is that you should be doing, then it doesn't matter what tool you use, you're probably not going to accomplish your goal. So the tools don't matter as much. I threw out Figma. Somebody mentioned one called Whimsical to me yesterday, and when I looked up what it was, it looked very similar to the things that Figma does. So I've never used it, but I assume it's pretty good as well. So there's a lot of different tools. Miro is one that's been popular. Mural is another one. So there's many out there, but ultimately, I got to be able to prototype, diagram, and then throw in some text so I can explain myself. And that's really the most important thing.
And sometimes you are limited by whatever tools your employer has. So while, I think we might say that you can use this tool for that or this tool for that, understanding what it is that you want to do. And then sometimes you just have to fit that into whatever tools are available at your company. Also, if you're interviewing, sometimes it is good to know some of the names of these because even though they may not have that tool, they might have something similar, and the skills are pretty much transferable. So,
Yeah.
So what qualities do you have? I guess this is a question for you. What qualities do you have that make you a good business analyst in terms of UX design? Well, you mentioned a couple. Empathy. Maybe we don't always think about that as a business analyst skill, but so maybe I'll change this question a little bit. When you were making that move from business analysis into UX, what were some of the transferable skills that you could immediately apply to that work you were doing?
I think the interview skills, number one, being able to visualize and model. So I like to remind people that even when you're a business analyst, like when I considered the work that I produce as a business analyst, right? So I have to write requirements, document requirements, get a bunch of different stakeholders to approve them, make sure the dev team understands them, make sure everybody understands the implications of all of those decisions, right? So I'm creating all this documentation to be able to be easily understood and used by those people. So what I produce has an experience, right? I can produce a user experience for my BA documentation, right? So I kind of was already passionate about that, right? Kind of going through the BA certification, understanding what my role is, and understanding that really the most important thing that I accomplish is making sure everybody has a clear and consistent understanding. And in order to create that, my documents have to be written and documented and created in a way that you, as the end user, whether you're a developer, whether you're an accountant, whether you're a director, can look at what I got and understand what I want you and need you to understand from your perspective, right? So to me, I was already creating user experiences, and that was the most transferable skill. That I was like, okay, now instead of my documentation that I want people to understand and be able to get through, it's the applications that we're actually building. So I had already kind of started, at least mentally, down that user experience path by wanting to create documentation that was just stellar and that people would be able to understand as quickly as possible. Like I would challenge myself to accomplish understanding in fewer and fewer meetings as I'm talking about the same concepts, just kind of forced me to like step my game up in what I'm creating, not just creating the standard that everybody else was doing, but how could I do it better next time, and then better the next time, and then better the next time. So that's kind of where it started, I think, that kind of passion for like making it better. And then it just spiraled on into user experience design.
It's interesting
So
how you describe that, because it's we talk about a business analysis mindset, about how you approach things, and what you just described to me sounds like a user experience mindset. You
mhm.
started on what you were working on at that time, and you've grown that into following that passion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because as I was hearing you, as I was reading between the lines here, the transferable skills I heard you saying, so I mentioned empathy, but I also heard critical thinking, a focus on excellence, a focus on making sure that you were understood and taking that feedback. So taking it not as a failure if you weren't, but actually accepting the challenge to do it better every time. So also a process-oriented way of thinking. And again, I think that those are very prevalent amongst business analysis professionals. But heck, I think if you are working in something else, finance, HR, engineering, and you're interested in getting into business analysis, those are things that you're doing today, most likely, or those are traits that you already have. So
Yeah.
easy to apply. All
I have a
righty.
question. I'm going to interject my own here.
Okay.
Sure.
How much of UX design is science versus art? So I do process flow diagrams. There's a lot of the rules that you follow to get it done, but to me, there's an art as well to make them readable, usable, that type of thing. So art and science, is it a balance or is it stronger one way or another?
My professors would say science. So when I got the degree, it was in library sciences, and it was kind of mixed in with courses from like psychology, engineering, and like all those things. But the reason I would say science is that the the way you get to a good user experience is not by creative genius or like sitting in a room alone and just thinking about it really hard until you have a eureka moment or something like that. It's really kind of going through the tried and true tested mechanisms to getting to a good user experience, like going out and talking to those end users. Obviously there's a little bit of art in having a good conversation and drawing out those real needs, but going through that process, if you look at the design thinking process, which is the same process that user experience designers use, which is empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. If you go through that cycle enough times, you're going to get to a good end user experience. No matter how dense and uncreative you are, you're eventually going to get to something good, as long as you keep kind of going through that process. Similar to going through the scientific method, right? You're going to learn things if you follow the scientific method, right? It's kind of guaranteed that you're going to come out the other end with some new knowledge based off of the hypothesis and experimentation and all of that. So it's a very similar thing that if you kind
Okay.
of go through that process now, each step in those processes require some activity from you, and you can get better and more efficient at doing those steps. And if you're a creative person, you might come up with better ways faster to get through those steps or more efficiently or draw things out better. So there is an art part of it. But I think the way you get there, you don't have to feel like you're a creative person or something like that to get to good user
Okay.
experiences. You just have to understand how you can inject or how you can think about things to inject the good user experience, and you'll eventually get there.
Okay. That's great. I like how you describe that. And it's good to hear it's more science because as a manager, and you are as well, if things are more scientific, we can make them repeatable. And when we can make them repeatable, we can repeat success.
Right.
So it helps make the team more effective. So that's great.
Because I tend to be a little more on the artsy side, but I totally appreciate the sciences. Um, I think that it is also good to hear that there is a little bit of an art to it. I always, as I was coaching business analysts, I would say that part of what we do is a little bit about your own style. And I think that's where the art comes in, right? So if you know all the techniques, you know why you are doing the things that you're doing, at that moment where you've got to apply them, where you get to apply who you are to solve that problem. So it's nice to hear that I can still be a little
Exactly.
bit of
I
an
think
artist.
before I decided to include the title of like user experience designer in my own for myself, I always considered myself a visual business analyst. That was my style of business analyst. If I could visualize it in whatever way, whether it was a process diagram, a concept model, or a prototype, I was going to go that way first, and that was my style, and that kind of evolved into the. So the art part is definitely there. The science part just helps you get there more effectively over time and efficiently.
Cool.
Um, how do you coach? So I know that you've got a team, and you said that a lot of them are new to this. And how do you coach for that? I don't know if everyone on your team has the same background that you do in UX, but how do you kind of coach for, okay, what we do is part science and part art, and here's the art part.
Yeah, so I would say that the art part, well, let me step back. People tend to do better in things that they're passionate about. So for me, when I'm coaching somebody on my team, and I don't push everybody on my team to be a user experience designer also, right? Not everybody has to create prototypes, and not everybody does. So what I look for in my team is, okay, we're all business analysts. We all are assigned projects. We all kind of take different approaches to do those things. What approaches are you tending to take more often that you feel more energized about? And I try to focus on that and understand why they're potentially choosing that path, and then try to move them to be more focused on those types of things and be better at the things that they're already passionate about, because then they're more likely to do a good job, do that kind of additional research beyond what I might just tell them. So I do have one user experience designer. I've had multiple actually, and one has moved on to be a product owner. And they kind of jumped in it themselves. And so I was like, okay, well, if you're interested in this, how about trying these things and these things, or these things, or have you looked at these things, or why don't you just go further into what you're digging into and really like commit to it? Like I fully will support you even if you fail to try to do it in this new way, if that's what's interesting to you. And I have some people who are much more analytically minded. They like to get into the data. So I let them go that route. I don't try to push them into creating wireframes because they would hate it and they would be mad at me for making them do it. So I don't make them do it. I let them do the things that they're most passionate about. Obviously, we all have conversations about, our role. We have something to accomplish here, right? So we still need to be accomplishing our role. But if you can do it in your way and be effective, and this person can do it in their way and be effective, and be more effective in those ways, then chase it. And then eventually, like, myself, you could push it into maybe a new career path or a new career direction that makes you extremely happy.
And I think you've touched on something that we've also talked about here. There is never one right technique in order to get the job done. It's your go-to technique, and getting exposure to all these different kinds of techniques, you'll probably find the one that really resonates with you and that you find you can use. So that is a great piece of advice there. All right, we're still getting more questions. This is awesome. So let's see. I think this is an interesting question. Because I feel like we often deal with this as business analysis professionals. What are good practices for learning about what the user needs versus what they want or what they think they want? I think this is a common BA problem. But how do you do that on the user experience side?
So on the UX side, it's always about what they need and never about what they want. So even if people come and ask you or tell you, I want you to do this function, you always have to go back and say, okay, why? Like, show me the things that are happening in your world. What data is coming through? What data are you trying to get on the other side? What's your day-to-day? Like, what are the actual goals that you're trying to accomplish? Yes, you asked me to put a button right here, but why do you want to put it right there? Why will that make you happy? Why will that add value? Because a lot of times, even as a business analyst, not even talking about user experience design, if you learn about that greater breadth, you understand, like, they asked for a button, but they didn't know that you have this other feature or this other capability that would work way better than putting a button right there. So you have to kind of, to me, I tell one of the people that work for me, and one of the analogies that I like to use often is like going to a doctor, right? I am not a doctor. Most of us on this call are not doctors. We have some ideas about things that might be going on with us, but we're not doctors. So if you could imagine when a patient goes into to a doctor, if you go to your doctor and you just say, yeah, I feel this way, so I definitely have this condition, that doctor is not going to say, okay, you have that condition, I will prescribe you the medicine. They're going to pretend they didn't hear you, and they're going to say, okay, what symptoms are you feeling? And they're going to ask you all the questions they need to ask you, one, to see if you actually have the thing that you have, but actually to properly diagnose you, which might be totally unrelated to whatever it is that you have. So I tell my BAs they should approach it like that. They're going to ask us for these things, but they don't actually know what they need. So yes, listen to what they ask for, but make sure you talk to them about, learn what it is that they actually need, because they may not know. And depending on the nature of your role as a business analyst, sometimes we're also the technical subject matter expert. Sometimes we're a business or a domain subject matter expert. So we may have knowledge that they just don't have, right? Whether it's about the tool, whether it's about other parts of the domain. And so we have to remember that as well, that they're not experts on everything. They're only experts on what they think they want, right? and you have to help them really get there. So treat
Mm.
all your stakeholders like they're your own little children or patients, and understand that sometimes that they don't know exactly what they want, and they might be likely wrong about what they want. So like talk to them and make sure you kind of get there. Obviously, don't say that to them. Don't be like, you don't know what you're talking about, but dig in and try to learn more. And you shouldn't feel like you're questioning them. You should feel like you're gaining their trust by understanding fully what it is that they exactly need.
Yeah.
And I was chuckling at your analogy there using the doctor, because some people look up, Google whatever symptom they have, and they self-diagnose. I draw a parallel with stakeholders that go and find a piece of software, and they love this one piece of feature, and they say, "Oh, we need the software." Well, what are you looking for? It's yeah, that resonated with me.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
and
usually a big one for us.
and also so case in point, this is why business analysis is a relationship business, because if that stakeholder comes to me saying, I want a button on a page based on my experience, my interview with them, there needs to be some other solution. We need to have that conversation respectfully. Don't make it awkward. They're just doing their best too. So, but if you have a good relationship with that person, then it can be less like, why do you need that button? Well, why? Well, why? Right? 5 whys. That can get weird. But if you have a good relationship with that person, then you can have a conversation and bring that person along and understand with you. So,
Usually
relationships
what I
really
would
matter.
say in that scenario, because I feel like a lot of people are going to go back and just hit them with the whys, and then they're going to have angry stakeholders. What I usually say in that scenario, when I think that maybe they're wanting something and they're not giving me the full story, is like, okay, you've asked me for this thing. I want to make sure I deliver it to you in the best way possible. So I'm going to ask you some additional questions to make sure that when we finally design this, it's going to be exactly what you need. And then they're really receptive to giving you as much information as possible, because they feel and know that you're doing it for them, not for, to try to like block them or reduce scope or whatever it may be.
Our stakeholders just want to be heard, and whether that's audibly heard, but also heard from, I'm a human that has some kind of need, and somebody is acknowledging that I have some kind of need. That goes a long way. That's where that kind of therapist thing, I think, comes in. So that is a great skill set, when you can make people really feel heard in the
Yeah.
work that we do. All righty, let's see.
Looks like we got
Okay.
about 10 more questions there.
Woo, woo.
Susan, why don't you look through that list and pick out the best one that you think? In the
Okay.
meantime, Angelo, you're doing a presentation for the Greater Atlanta chapter this coming Saturday.
Yes.
We'll drop a link. We'll ask Rosalind to drop a link in the chat there so people can get to it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So similar to the questions you guys have asked me, like, how does the role of BA mesh with the role of user experience, or the activities of a user experience designer? And they mesh quite a bit. So the Atlanta chapter was interested in kind of digging a little deeper into that. So here we kind of talked about it at a high level. In that session, we're actually going to dig deeper into those techniques, try some of those techniques, really see that they're not outside of the skill set of a business analyst. It's just more tools that you could use to get to a better end result. And kind of go through it in a structured way that lets them see that there's multiple ways that they can inject themselves as a business analyst with, or inject some user experience design concepts as a business analyst to provide value that's not just creating prototypes and wireframes and beautiful visual designs. That's really the end of the road. That's what happens when all the other things are done. There's lots of things that could happen before you get to that point, that as a BA, you have direct ability to impact those things. So that's really the focus. It's going to be this Saturday from 9 to noon, or 9:30 to 12:30. And you can get all the details in the chat.
Wow, sounds like it'll be jam-packed with lots of great information.
Oh man, if anyone from the Atlanta chapter is watching, you are going to be in for a good time. This has been a great conversation, Angelo. All right, now I'm going to hit you with the hard question, because this is a pretty good question. Why is UI and UX separated from application and function? I always feel you can't consider one without the other. Why are there two?
You're talking about UI versus UX, or UI UX versus function?
I think so. This person said UI separated from application, but I am gonna maybe change it a little bit and say, why is there a separate work done on UX that is separate from the rest of the application development? Does that make sense?
It did. First, I would say I don't think it should be, right? So you're user experience designer. So we didn't talk about it in this session, and I'm going to talk about it much more on Saturday. But from a strategy perspective, right, that's the first time you should be talking to the end users, right? You should be defining personas, defining your target audience. When you're creating the information architecture of your application, which is the navigation, the taxonomy, the interaction design, if you don't know who those end users are, how can you know the right words to use and how to create a navigation structure, or how to search, how you should create a search structure that works for how that person actually does their job. So I would say that they shouldn't be separated. I think the reason that they are is because just the nature of really the way waterfall has kind of ingrained us with requirements, then design, then development, et cetera. So you don't think about design until you're done with requirements, right? And you don't think about requirements until you're done with the business case or whatever, right? So waterfall has kind of separated out those things. But if you ask me, they should be incorporated right from the get-go. It's the cultural thing, right? Obviously, I'm a user experience designer, and I'm passionate about it. So, and being a more senior person, I'm going to be able to inject those things earlier on in the projects that I'm on and make sure that they're being thought about, because I'm in the room and I could make sure those things are happening. But if nobody's in the room to bring it up, then it's just not going to get brought up, right? So that's kind of why it's separated, right? You go through the requirements and then you hire some user experience designer who didn't get to be there as part of the requirements, and then tell them to do their job, when in reality, somebody in the room should have been thinking about the user experience the entire time.
Yeah, and it's just a reminder. I mean, that to me is what agility is
Right.
all about. It's making sure that we've got all the right people at the table as early as possible so that we can start to understand it sooner rather than later, because it just gets more expensive. I've got one last thing. So I think because we are running a little over, but Angelo, I was when I was checking out your YouTube channel, like, you had me at requirement management in SharePoint. That's like my thing. And then I saw your dance videos and I was like,
Oh,
okay, I have I think I have met my match. They are excellent. Question, are you a trained dancer or do you just enjoy dancing?
it depends on what your definition of trained is. I would say I just enjoy dancing. In college is when I did the majority of the dancing, and I was a part of all these dance teams and all of that. But I'm not like a trained dancer. I don't know all the technique names or anything like that. I just got really into it in college, and then I made a lot of friends who are into it, so it kind of has stayed as a part of the background of my life. I don't actively dance on teams or anything like that or perform anymore. But in college, I did do a lot of performing. I participated in a lot of teams, and it was just a really fun thing for me to be a part of at the time, and it made me a lot of really great friends. So it's just a hobby, we'll say.
Well, I'm also a dancer. That's why it got my attention. And so, at some point, you and I should chat about the lessons from dance that we're able to apply to our work, because I see many. And maybe that's just because
Same,
I've been dancing for a long time.
same,
So, all right. Well, Angelo, it's been really great meeting you today and learning
absolutely.
some about UX. This is great. So check out his YouTube channel. Also, the event on Saturday. That sounds like a great one. The Atlanta chapter is just so lucky to be getting some of your knowledge. So we will wrap things up. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and we are going to talk about another hot topic: business analysis job titles. The question here is, what's in a job title? Because, we do our work not always as with a business analyst title. So we'll be talking about that Wednesday, September 28th at 10:30 Eastern. Thanks everybody for joining us.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and we'll leave another one right here for you to help you in your business analysis career. If you haven't subscribed to the IIBA YouTube channel yet, you can click over here and click on the bell icon to get notified every time we publish a brand new video.